Hi everyone, my name's Rena Vanzo and I'm a genetic counselor who's here at CARD today from Lineagen. Lineagen is a small company, about 15 to 20 members, and we work in Salt Lake City, Utah, and our mission is to bring families the newest technology available in genetic testing for children with autism spectrum disorder. So I'd like to tell you a little bit more about that testing today, and specifically Lineagen, where I work, and CARD has a unique clinical partnership, and I'm going to give you details about that as well. So an agenda for today's talk is really pretty simple. It's just talking about the specifics of the partnership and also talking more broadly, what are some of the benefits of genetic testing for an individual who already has a clinical diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder or a related condition. And specifically, we're going to talk about the importance of having a genetic diagnosis. And then also we're going to talk about one specific genetic test called chromosomal microarray analysis. I like to say CMA for short, that's a mouthful. Also, I'm going to give you some information to think about why you might want to be involved in this partnership and get a CMA performed by Lineagen. And then we'll go through two specific case studies of actual families and children who have gone through our testing service with Lineagen. So to get started, CARD and Lineagen launched a clinical partnership in December of last year. So it's only been a few months now, and the purpose of this is to really bring these two organizations together and get the word out about important genetic testing. In total, we have spoken with over 10 or 15 families, and we'd like to see that number go up. That's why I want to share with you some of the reasons why this testing could be important for you and for your family. In general, the goals are just to improve access. Like I mentioned, let's get the word out about this testing, why it could be important for you specifically, and then also sharing and combining that genetic information with a child's clinical information. CARD, as you probably know, has a really great phenotypic data set, which is called the skills database. So maybe we can find clues in someone's genetic information that is going to tell us how they might respond to a therapy, or vice versa. Maybe we find unique things about people and their behaviors, and then we can find the underpinning genetic change or genetic diagnosis for that. So what I'd like to do first is just let everyone know that as a parent who has a child with autism spectrum disorder, I'm sure you go through a number of different evaluations. You have to see many different doctors to get the care your child needs, and we recognize that the genetics piece is just one part of that puzzle. So I know that it's been becoming more and more common. Don't feel bad if it's not something you've heard about or it isn't something that you've done before, because as I mentioned, there's a lot of different things that you're going through with your child. So one thing to talk about is the benefits of having an underlying genetic diagnosis. If your child already has a clinical diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, I hear a lot of parents say, my child already has a diagnosis of autism. Why do I want another diagnosis? And really what we're learning in the medical community is that autism may be an outward expression of an underlying genetic diagnosis. So if we can find that underlying genetic diagnosis for a child, there may be a number of things we can do for that boy or girl and his family. So these are some of the four main benefits that I think of when I think of a child who has autism and then gets an underlying genetic diagnosis. So first of all, families just may be wondering, you may be wondering, why does my child have autism? What happened? What did I do? What didn't I do? And of course, rationally, we all know there's nothing you did. There's nothing that you could have done to prevent this from happening. It's not your fault. But I think that sometimes for some families, if they're able to learn a genetic cause for that diagnosis in their child, they may be able to forgive themselves. And that can be really helpful and comforting. At least that's what a lot of parents have told me. Another reason is that families may be able to connect with very specific support groups and learn from other parents who've been in their same situation. One thing that I hear a lot of parents say is that if you've met one child with autism, you've met one child with autism. All of these children are going to be different and unique in their own ways. Some are really good at language aspects, while others may not be. And maybe the reason these children are so different from one another is that there are underlying genetic causes, and the kids who have the same genetic causes may actually be more like one another. And so that may give you the opportunity to speak with another parent whose child is 5 or 10 years older than yours, and you can share stories and help support each other in that way. A third reason why it could be important to have a genetic diagnosis is some families would like more specific information about the chance for another family member. Maybe that's a child of your own or a grandchild, but what is the likelihood for another child in this family to have a diagnosis of autism? Well, if we know the underlying genetic reason for autism in the family, we can establish how that runs through a family and what the specific recurrence risk or number is for other family members. So just to give you an example, if we learn that a child who has autism has an underlying diagnosis of Angelman syndrome, we know that Angelman syndrome is a rare occurrence, and it often occurs as a fluke out of the blue. Then we could tell that family they have less than a 1% chance of having a second child with Angelman syndrome that may express itself as features of autism. So that's one example of how having a genetic diagnosis can personalize recurrence risk for your family. And then the fourth reason, and one that some families find really important, is the fact that if we give a child with autism an underlying genetic diagnosis, we may be able to treat or even prevent medical problems that are more likely to occur. So as one example, children who have a diagnosis of 22q11.2 deletion syndrome, that's a deletion of a very specific part of chromosome 22, those children are more likely to have what's called a submucosal cleft palate, or an opening between the nose and the mouth, and that can complicate speech. It can complicate feeding in early kids. So if we know a child has this chromosome condition, we can be on the lookout for features that might suggest there's that submucosal cleft, and that can be fixed and may be able to prevent feeding problems or more difficulty with speech as that child grows up. So being able to figure out what medical risks a child may have can be helpful, and those things can range from seizures, kidney problems, vision and hearing problems, to many different aspects of a person's health. So now I'd like to talk about one specific genetic testing technology, and that's the CMA I mentioned earlier. CMA is an assessment of a child's chromosomes. Everyone should be born with 46 total chromosomes. We get one of each pair from mom and one of each pair from dad, so there are 23 pairs altogether. And if a child has a missing piece called a deletion or an extra piece called a duplication, that can lead to various neurodevelopmental problems and also some medical risks. It just depends what part of the chromosome is missing or duplicated and what genetic information should be there that maybe that child is not getting or is getting too much of. So because of the reasons we just talked about, because of finding an answer why, guiding a child's medical management, giving families the ability to connect with support groups and to know their personalized recurrence risk, for all of these reasons, one medical organization called the American College of Medical Genetics, they recommend that all children with autism spectrum disorder are offered or are at least given the chance to learn about CMA. And in general, about 15 to 20% of kids who have a diagnosis of autism or a related disorder of childhood development, those kids will have something that we identify on the CMA test. So out of every 100 kids with autism that has this testing, about 15 to 20 of them are going to get some sort of genetic explanation. That may be something that we have heard about before, that we know a lot of information about. There's a support group. We know exactly what medical risks this can bring as the child grows. Or we may find something that we don't quite understand yet, that we haven't, as a medical community, learned enough about. If that happens, we still like to share that information because this testing is becoming more and more common, and more children are, as more children have it done, we're going to learn what it means down the road. So here's just an image of what the cytogeneticist is evaluating when a child has a CMA. And I know this is a very busy slide, so I'm going to try and walk you through it using the mouse. So over here on the right-hand side, this is a cartoon image of chromosome number 8. Our chromosomes are divided into two arms. There's the top and the bottom, separated by what we call the centromere. And the top portion is called the P arm. P stands for petite, and the cytogeneticists happened to be in France when they determined how to name these chromosomes. So petite for small or short became the top part of the chromosome. And because Q comes after P in the alphabet, the long arm, or the bottom part of the chromosome, is always called the Q arm. So this is chromosome 8P, and this is chromosome 8Q. And then these chromosome arms are divided into subbands. So for instance, this might be called chromosome 8P to 1.3. So what the chromosome analysis software allows the cytogeneticist to do is see if there is a deletion, that's flagged by the red bar, or if there's a duplication, that's flagged by this blue bar. So now imagine this chromosome is turned over on its side and is laying across the center here. We call these dots, there are millions and millions of these dots on a chromosome microarray, we call them probes. And so the probes, the copy number responsive probes, should be lining up right around the 0 line right here. So what this is, technically, is a comparison of a child's DNA to the expected amount of DNA. So if it's around this 0 line, the child has the same amount of DNA as the control set. However, if we see these probes above the line, that means the child has a duplication or has more DNA than the reference set. On the flip side, this is a deletion where the child has less DNA than the control set. So this is what the cytogeneticist does. He or she will evaluate areas of additional or missing genetic code, and we'll see if that corresponds to any known genetic conditions, what genes are in the area, and how do we expect this is going to affect the child's developmental future. There is another set of probes that do something a little bit different. It's a little bit more complicated, but what I will say is that it serves as a second measure, and if we see indication of a duplication or a deletion with the copy number responsive probes, we also get confirmation of that below. These SNP probes do a number of other things, but one of the key roles is that they support the information from the copy number probes. So now what I'd like to do is explain a little bit about Lineagen's specific CMA. CMA is something that a number of different laboratories can provide, and because I work at Lineagen, I know the most about our particular service, so that's what I'd like to share with you today. We offer not just a standard chromosomal microarray, but a customized chromosomal microarray. What we've done is we've worked with some research groups and the company Affymetrix, who actually makes a chromosome microarray, and we've improved its ability to identify deletions and duplications that have been linked to autism spectrum disorder. So in general, What our chromosome microarray offers is a twofold increase in the ability to identify deletions and duplications linked to autism spectrum disorder. Overall, we are seeing about a 25 to 26% detection rate as compared to about 15 to 20% for CMAs in general. We also offer the testing through a cheek swab rather than a blood draw. We do accept both, but we've taken the time to create this testing on a cheek swab because we know that it can be quite difficult to collect blood on little kiddos. So we've made this service easier to use for families. And another thing we do is what's called financial counseling. So before a family decides to have a CMA with Lineagen, we contact their insurance company directly to find out what their policy needs in order to do a CMA. Sometimes we have to send information in advance. Sometimes we have to show that this is a medically necessary service. We do all that work for the families. And through this process, we learn if the family will be responsible for any out-of-pocket costs. If so, you're given that information in writing before you decide to proceed with the testing. We also provide a personalized report. We give you an electronic link to your child's specific results, and our reports are pretty long. They're about 50 pages in length, 50 that is. Doesn't have to be read at once, of course. It can be read in multiple settings. And what we do is include pictures. We have a glossary for some of the more technical information. And we also couple that with telephone genetic counseling services. So myself or one of the other genetic counselors at Lineagen, Megan or Mallory, we're able to talk with families over the phone before testing and after testing to make sure all their questions are answered. We can even go through that report with you after the testing is done to help explain some of the things that may require extra clarification. So now what I'd like to do is go through two case studies. And again, these are actual cases of families who have had the Lineagen CMA service, which we call First Step DX Plus. The first child was 5 years old at the time of our testing, a little boy with a diagnosis of developmental delay. And his pediatrician ordered our service because he was wondering, for this 5-year-old, is there an underlying what we call etiology? Is there a genetic etiology? And the family was wondering, how is my child going to do in school whenever he progresses out of kindergarten? So the testing was done and there was an abnormal CMA result. Specifically, the child had a deletion 1.6 MB, that means 1.6 megabases. That's just the unit of measure for genetics. There was a deletion on chromosome 7q11.23. So if you can see this chromosome pair over here, one of these chromosomes is from mother, one is from father. We don't know which is which, and it doesn't matter. But this deletion, here it is on one copy, and this is the entire chromosome 7. This yellow region is just denoting the Q11.23 band. And as you can see from the other chromosome, it's shorter. That band has been deleted for this child. So he has two copies of chromosome 7. One of them is shorter because it's missing that specific region. And we know that this deletion is commonly seen in individuals with Williams syndrome. In fact, it is the only genetic cause of Williams syndrome that we know about. You may have heard of Williams syndrome, you may not, but it is a fairly common genetic condition. It occurs in about 1 in 7,500 people to about 1 in 10,000 people. That's the prevalence in all people who are born, not just people with developmental delay. So this result was really important for this family and for the child's doctor because there happens to be a healthcare guideline for children who have Williams syndrome. So after this result was given back to the doctor was able to say, oh my goodness, there are all of these evaluations that I should be doing for him that I would have never otherwise known about. So for example, children with Williams syndrome may have an imbalance in the level of calcium in their blood. If there is an imbalance, that could cause a child to have seizures. Now that we know about this, we can make sure we're watching that level and we're regulating it, and we hopefully prevent seizures from happening for this child. That's just one example. There are some other structural birth defects that are more common in children with Williams syndrome. There's something called supravalvular aortic stenosis, or SVAS for short. 75% of people with Williams syndrome are born with this birth defect that can cause other critical medical management changes. And if we know about it, we can have that child followed by a cardiologist and hopefully prevent some medical problems because of it. So having a genetic diagnosis of Williams syndrome in particular sort of gives us a roadmap for this child. Now we know what we can do to help him reach his highest potential over the next few years. Let's prevent some of these medical problems from happening. And if we can't prevent them, maybe we can at least be on the lookout for them and be prepared for them as they come up. As sort of a summary for this case, we know there are published guidelines for the healthcare management of a child with Williams syndrome. And we could never follow that unless we knew this child had Williams syndrome, and that's something that CMA picks up in over 99% of cases where it is present. It's very good at diagnosing Williams syndrome. Also then, the genetic counselor was able to speak with the family, go through their result, and also help them understand what some of the strengths of children with Williams syndrome can be. There are a lot of strengths and a lot of areas in which they excel. So let's talk about those things and make sure the child is going to excel and can use those strengths to his or her advantage as he or she grows up. Also, as I mentioned before, this family was interested in having a second child. They know that Williams syndrome does not often run in families. Neither of the parents had any signs of it. So they knew that if they were to have another child, they could at least be on the lookout for certain clinical features in that child. And if they were present, that child could be tested once he or she was born to see if any early intervention needed to be taking place. Also, we were able to talk about the fact that parents can't control the chromosomes they pass on to their children and whether or not a deletion or a duplication can occur. It's something that's out of our control, and that's something that the family really felt, they felt comforted in that information. So on to case study 2. This is the second case study that I'm presenting today, but it's also an actual case from a family who had testing with Lineagen. So this child was a 7-month-old little girl, and she had been diagnosed clinically with hypotonia, which is low tone, developmental delay, and specifically she had just started rolling and was unable to sit up. So for many of you mothers out there, you know that children typically start rolling around 3 to 4 months, and they're usually able to sit unassisted at 6 months. So this was a red flag for the family and for the doctor. The doctor in this case happened to be a pediatric neurologist, so specialists and general pediatricians both order chromosome microarray testing. And the physician was really concerned about the severity of low tone in the little girl and wanted to understand what may be the best way to go about this. So the neurologist ordered our testing and found a 9.6 megabase duplication. So there was additional information that was composed of chromosome 15. So this is actually also a well-known duplication of genetic information, and it's associated with something called inversion duplication 15 or isodicentric 15 syndrome. This is less common than Williams syndrome. It occurs in about 1 in 30,000 individuals who are born. So this is an image of what the child's chromosome looked like. This picture on the left is a karyotype. This is a standard picture of a child's chromosomes. This used to be the first line genetic testing for individuals with developmental disability. I kind of think of it as a Polaroid. You can get a general view of the chromosomes, you can count them, and in this case, if the child had a regular chromosome analysis, you could see there weren't 46 chromosomes, there was actually a 47th chromosome. So there was an extra chromosome composed of material from chromosome 15. And specifically, the CMA is able to tell us, well, what part of chromosome 15, what genes are exactly duplicated for this child? Because that ends up translating into more specific information we can use for medical management. This is just a more detailed image of what the child's duplication was composed of. It was composed of material from the centromere to band 15q13.3. So why is this diagnosis important? Well, most individuals with inversion duplication 15 syndrome end up having seizures at some point in their lives. And that's really critical to know. Number one, it's critical to know if your child will develop seizures later or is likely to, so we can prepare families, help them understand what to do in the case of a seizure emergency. But also for this condition specifically, there are seizure medications that should not be used for someone with this duplication. Certain medications actually make the seizures worse. And so for this little girl, if she did develop seizures later on and this testing wasn't done, she may have been given a medication that could actually make her seizures worse. So with this information, we can go into the future, her family and doctor can go into the future with their eyes wide open, knowing if she does have a seizure, we know what we need to treat her with. Also, we know how to tailor some of her behavioral therapies. So for example, children with this condition do very well with picture exchange communication. And also we know some other medical risks that may go along with this, which include gastroesophageal reflux or GERD, and then also curvature of the spine or scoliosis. So these are things that can be looked out for and managed for her as she grows up. One reason why I also think this is a really important case is because children with inversion duplication, actually let me back up for a minute. What I should say first is that many children who have a genetic diagnosis will have some outward signs. Maybe they have ears that stick out a little further than you would expect, or their eyes may be a little bit more wide-spaced. Just unique things that may cause a parent or a doctor to think this child could have something genetic. Children with 15q, this condition, inversion duplication 15, they don't have any outward signs or symptoms that may make a parent think they have a genetic condition. In some cases, they only have autism spectrum disorder. And so it can be really important to do CMA even if you think a child doesn't have an underlying genetic condition based on his or her appearance. So genetics can be tricky in that way. Also, as I mentioned, we were able to identify the child's strengths, in this case, picture exchange, and also they're known to have very good memories. So these are things that we can capitalize on for this little girl as we go forward. And there does happen to be a specific support group for this condition, and we were also able to connect the family to others in her area who are experiencing the same thing. So that's all I had for you today, but I wanted to let you know that if you are interested in having the First Step DX Plus or Lineagen's customized CMA, you can either call us or visit our website. Our phone number is 1-888-888-OPEN or 6736, and our website is www.firststepdx.com. So thanks a lot. It's been an honor to speak with you today, and you can call at any time and we're happy to answer your questions.